The auction master lifted his gavel, and Eleanor Hayes knew she was about to lose her children. The sound of the wind cut through Covenant Creek like a blade, sharp and unforgiving, and the cold bit into her skin as if it wanted to claim her too. 30 seconds. That was all the law allowed. 30 seconds to become someone's wife or watch officials tear her family apart and send her children in different directions across the frontier like unwanted freight. 7 small hands clutched her worn wool coat. The coat had been mended 3 times and still looked tired, much like Eleanor herself. She stood straight anyway. Her knees shook, and her fingers were numb inside thin gloves, but she would not bend. She had learned long ago that weakness invited cruelty. The crowd watched her with blank faces. Some looked bored. Some looked annoyed. Others stared at her like she was a bad deal no one wanted to make. The 47th man had already turned away. She had heard the words whispered and laughed aloud. Fat, undesirable, burden. Eleanor did not cry. Tears had never fed a child. Her oldest, Sarah, stood close at her side. 13 years old with eyes too grown for her age, she tried to be brave. Thomas, 11, squared his shoulders like a man, though his jaw trembled. James and William stayed quiet, watching the men the way hunted animals watched wolves. Margaret and Catherine held hands, fingers locked tight. Little Edward, only 3, hid behind Eleanor's skirt and peeked out with wide, frightened eyes. Eleanor Hayes, widow.
Age 32. 7 children, ages 3 to 13.
A few men laughed. Others shifted their weight, already thinking about cost, about mouths to feed, about work. No one thought about her courage. No one thought about her heart. Opening bid $75, the auction master said. Includes transport, settlement fees, and the children. Silence followed. The kind of silence that made the world feel cruel. Eleanor had known this might happen. She had known it back in Philadelphia when she signed the papers. She had known it when she sold the last of her furniture and watched her children eat their final warm meal in a cramped city room. Debt collectors did not care if your children were hungry. Factory bosses did not care if your bones ached. The West had sounded like hope, and hope, even desperate hope, was better than watching your babies starve. 70, the auction master tried again. A man in a beaver hat spat into the mud. Too fat, he said, like he was talking about a broken wagon. 7 brats might as well buy a plague. Sarah's hand slipped into Eleanor's. Eleanor squeezed back, steady and sure, because her children needed something steady. 50, the auction master said, his voice sharp now. Last call. Behind the platform, 2 officials waited with papers ready. Eleanor recognized the thin woman with the tight mouth, Mrs. Tibb, Cromwell from the Bride Society office. Those papers were the backup plan, orphanage placements, work farms, a legal knife ready to cut her family into pieces. The auction master lifted his gavel higher. If no bid is received, he announced, the children will be remanded to territorial custody under the Orphan Placement Act.
Edward made a small sound. Mama. Eleanor bent down, ignoring the pain in her knees, and touched his red cheek.
Hush, love. Be brave just a little longer. She stood again and faced the crowd. Most men looked away. A few stared back with hard, measuring eyes. None of them saw the woman who had kept 7 children alive through a Philadelphia winter on pennies and grit. They only saw her body and her burden. Going once, the auction master said. Eleanor's heart hammered in her ears. Going twice. Sarah's tears fell silent. Thomas clenched his fists. The younger children pressed together like they could disappear. Gone. A voice cut through the air from the back of the crowd. Deep, rough. Like stone breaking loose from a mountain. I'll take her. Every head turned. The man who stepped forward did not look like he belonged in town. He looked like he belonged to the mountains themselves. Tall and broad, dressed in buckskin and fur, boots leaving deep prints in half-frozen mud. Dark hair fell past his shoulders, streaked with gray. His face was hard, sharp cheekbones, a jaw like carved stone, and eyes the pale color of winter ice. The crowd parted for him without thinking. The auction master blinked. "You'll take her. You know she has 7 children." "All 7, the man said without hesitation. A murmur rolled through the crowd. Shock, not kindness. Someone whispered his name like a warning. Caleb Roar. Eleanor's stomach tightened. She had heard that name before she ever stepped onto the platform. The mountain man. The one who barely came down. The one people said had blood on his hands from the war. Caleb stepped closer, his eyes moving over the children, sharp but not unkind. Then he looked at Eleanor. She met his gaze and did not look away. "How much?" he asked. "The current offer is 50, the auction master said. Caleb's mouth tightened. 300. The crowd gasped. Mrs. Baldwood. Cromwell's head snapped up. Even she looked shaken. "That covers everything," the auction master stammered. "Passage, settlement, provisions." "Good," Caleb said. "Then stop wasting time." The gavel came down, not like a sentence, but like a door closing on one life and opening into another. Eleanor felt dizzy, relief tangled with fear. A man did not pay $300 for nothing. Caleb turned to her. "You understand what this is? A marriage contract," Eleanor said, her voice steady. "Shelter and food for work. A roof for my children." "That's right," he said. "I've got a homestead in the high country. Rough travel. Long winters. Work is hard. Your children will work, too. Everyone earns their keep. I'm not selling dreams. I'm offering survival." He paused. "You want it or not?" Eleanor looked at her children. 7 lives waiting on her answer. She glanced once at the officials and their papers, then back at Caleb Roar. "I want it," she said. "I accept." They left Covenant Creek within the hour. Caleb's wagon was sturdy and packed with supplies. He lifted the smaller children into the back with ease. Then he offered Eleanor his hand. His palm was calloused and warm. She took it because she had no other path left. The town fell behind them. Eleanor did not look back. The land opened wide and wild. Sage, tough grass, dark stands of pine. Mountains rose ahead like teeth against the sky. The children huddled under blankets, whispering. Sarah watched Caleb with careful eyes. For a long time he did not speak. "You warm enough?" he asked at last. "Yes," Eleanor said. "The children too." He nodded. "Blankets in the back if you need more." It was not softness, but it was care. As the trail climbed and the air sharpened, Eleanor watched his hands on the reins. Steady, scarred. "Sure. Why did you do it?" she asked. "Because I needed help," he said. "And I don't leave children to be torn apart by paper men." By dusk, the wind smelled like snow. Eleanor pulled her children close and stared into the dark ahead, wondering what kind of man bought a family no one wanted, and why the town seemed afraid of him. Somewhere beyond the trees and the cold was his homestead, and Eleanor felt that what waited there was not just hard work and winter storms, but the truth about Caleb Roar. The storm came down from the mountains before sunrise on the second day of travel. It arrived fast and heavy, as if the sky had decided to bury the world without warning. Snow spun so thick Eleanor could barely see the horse's ears ahead of the wagon. The wheels groaned as they sank into deepening drifts, and the children clutched each other beneath the blankets. Caleb Roar drove as if the storm were only an inconvenience. His jaw stayed tight, his eyes narrow beneath the brim of his hat, reading the land the way Eleanor once read factory ledgers back east. Calm, sharp, certain. Still, even he could not ignore the danger growing around them. "We need shelter," he said, raising his voice above the wind. "There's an old trapper's cabin close. If we don't reach it, this storm will freeze us before nightfall." Eleanor pulled Edward closer, her fingers numb but firm. "How far?" "Half a mile," Caleb said. "Maybe less." Half a mile felt like 50 in weather like this. The wagon slid sideways on ice, and the children gasped as Eleanor grabbed the seat to stay upright. Caleb snapped the reins lightly, steadying the horses with quiet words. He never shouted. That surprised her. Snow piled on the wagon cover, heavy enough to threaten collapse. Eleanor pushed it off when she could, her arms burning, her breath sharp in her chest. Then Caleb pointed through the white blur. There. At first she saw nothing. Then a shape appeared. A low log cabin half buried in snow, leaning but standing. Relief hit her so hard her knees nearly gave out. They reached it just as the wind screamed louder. Caleb jumped down, lifted the youngest children, and carried them inside. Eleanor followed, slipping on the ice, her heart pounding, until all 7 children were safely through the door. The cabin was dark and bitter cold, but dry. A stone hearth waited at the far wall. Dust covered the table and floor, untouched for months. "Stay with the little ones," Caleb said. "I'll get wood." He vanished back into the storm. Sarah moved at once, helping clear the hearth. Thomas hovered near the door, fear creeping into his eyes. "Mama, is he coming back?" "Yes," Eleanor said, though doubt tugged at her. "He won't leave us." When Caleb returned with an armful of wood, snow clinging to his hair and beard, he struck a flame without delay. Fire bloomed, weak at first, then stronger. Heat crept back into frozen bones. They slept close to the fire. Caleb kept watch by the door, rifle across his knees. The storm howled through the night, but the cabin held. By morning, the wind had not eased. Snow blocked the door almost halfway. Caleb handed Eleanor a tin cup of hot coffee. "You'll need strength," he said. "We may be stuck." The children woke slow and quiet. Thomas helped shovel snow with Caleb, following every instruction exactly. Eleanor watched through a frost-clouded window, her heart twisting until they returned safely. The storm eased late that afternoon. The world fell silent beneath white. They left the cabin the next morning, spirits lighter, though Eleanor sensed the land was still watching them. They had traveled barely an hour when Caleb lifted his hand sharply. "Quiet." The horses slowed. Eleanor felt fear slide cold into her chest. "Someone's following," Caleb said. 3 riders appeared through the trees, dark shapes moving fast. "Roar!" a voice called. "Hold up!" Caleb muttered a name Eleanor had never heard spoken kindly. Crowley. The riders cut in front of the wagon, forcing them to stop. The lead man smiled, a long scar pulling at his cheek as his eyes slid over Eleanor and the children. "Looks like you picked up cargo," he said. Eleanor pulled the children closer, rage and fear tangling in her chest. "You have something I want," Crowley said. Caleb's voice dropped. "Ride away." Crowley laughed. "A woman like her would last longer with me. The kids, too. Plenty of use for them." Something snapped inside Eleanor. "We don't belong to you," she said, her voice shaking but strong. Crowley reached for his pistol. Caleb fired first. The bullet tore Crowley's hat free. Horses reared. Snow exploded into the air. The men crashed together in the snow, fists flying, breath steaming. Eleanor watched in horror as Crowley gained the upper hand, forcing Caleb down, hands closing around his throat. She did not think. She moved. Grabbing the spare rifle from the wagon, Eleanor ran through the drifts, heart pounding so hard it drowned out the storm's echo. She swung the rifle with all her strength. The wooden stock struck Crowley's head. He collapsed into the snow. Caleb pushed free, coughing, stunned. He stared at Eleanor like he was seeing her for the first time. "I protected my family," she said simply. Crowley's men dragged their leader away, fear finally winning over greed. Silence returned to the mountains. They rode on without speaking for a long time. When the forest opened, a valley appeared below, guarded by rock and pine. A solid log cabin stood at its heart. A barn, fences, firewood stacked high. Caleb slowed the wagon. "Welcome home."
The word felt heavy and fragile.
The children ran ahead, laughter breaking free at last. Eleanor stood beside Caleb, breathing in the sharp mountain air, feeling something settle deep in her chest. Not safety yet, but the promise of it. The valley was quiet after the wagon stopped, the kind of quiet that felt deep and old. Snow rested on the tall pines like a careful hand, and the mountains stood around the homestead as if they had chosen to guard it. Eleanor climbed down from the wagon, her boots sinking into the soft snow. And for the first time since Philadelphia, she felt the ground beneath her feet did not want to push her away. The children scattered with cautious excitement. Thomas ran toward the fence, testing its strength. James and William stared at the barn like it was a castle. Margaret and Catherine stayed close, holding hands, while Edward pointed at the smokehouse and laughed, the sound bright and surprising in the cold air. Sarah stayed near Eleanor, her eyes taking in every detail, already measuring this place the way a grown woman would. Caleb stood beside Eleanor, watching them all. "They'll be safe here," he said quietly. "Safer than anywhere else I know." Eleanor nodded. Her throat felt tight. "It's more than I hoped for." He turned toward the cabin. "Let's get them inside. Cold will creep up fast." The cabin was solid and warm, built with care and patience. Inside there was space enough to breathe. A long table, shelves lined with jars, hooks for coats, a wide hearth that promised heat even in the worst winter. Eleanor moved through the room slowly, touching the edge of the table, the back of a chair, as if making sure it was real. That first night, they ate stew Caleb had prepared earlier, thick and filling. The children ate until their bellies were full, then ate a little more just to be sure. Eleanor watched them, her chest aching with relief. No one rushed them. No one counted bites. Later, after the children were asleep in makeshift beds near the fire, Eleanor stood alone at the window. Moonlight spilled across the snow, turning the valley silver. Caleb joined her, keeping a careful distance. "You were brave today," he said. "So were you," she answered. He shook his head. "I've fought men before. That wasn't new. What you did was." Eleanor thought of Crowley's hands on Caleb's throat, thought of the way fear had vanished when her children were threatened. "I won't let anyone take them," she said. "Not ever again." Caleb studied her, then nodded once. "Neither will I." Days passed, then weeks. Winter settled in hard, but the homestead held. The children learned their chores quickly. Thomas helped with wood. James and William learned to care for the animals. Sarah kept track of supplies with Eleanor, her careful mind sharp and steady. Margaret and Catherine learned to cook simple meals, laughing when flour dusted their noses. Edward followed Caleb everywhere, his small boots leaving uneven tracks in the snow. Eleanor worked from dawn to night. She cooked, cleaned, mended, and managed the household with quiet skill. She stretched supplies without complaint and kept peace among tired children. Caleb noticed everything, even when he said little. One evening, as snow tapped softly against the windows, Caleb spoke while sharpening a tool. "Town will talk," he said. "They always do."
"They already did," Eleanor replied.
"I survived that." He glanced at her. "Crowley won't forget."
"I won't either," she said.
Caleb nodded. "If he comes back, he won't leave." Spring came slow but sure. Snow melted into rushing streams. Green pushed through the brown earth. The children laughed more. Eleanor laughed too, sometimes without realizing it. Strength returned to her body, not the strength others judged, but the kind that let her rise each morning without dread. One afternoon, a rider appeared at the edge of the valley. Eleanor felt fear rise, sharp and fast, but Caleb only watched calmly. The rider stopped at the fence and raised his hands. It was a lawman from Covenant Creek. "I heard Crowley was run out of the lower valley," he said. "Men say he won't be coming back this way." Caleb said nothing. Eleanor stood beside him, her shoulders square. The lawman looked at her, then at the children playing behind the cabin. "You built something solid here?" he said. "Not many do." After he left, Eleanor exhaled slowly. Caleb looked at her. "It's over." She nodded. "I believe it." That night, they sat on the porch as the sun dipped behind the mountains. The children's voices floated from inside, warm and safe. Caleb rested his elbows on his knees. "I told you once I wasn't looking for a wife," he said. That hasn't changed. Eleanor turned to him, calm and steady. I wasn't looking to be saved. A small smile touched his mouth. Good. He faced her fully. But I was looking for someone who could stand beside me. Someone who wouldn't break. Someone who would choose this life. Eleanor looked out at the land, at the cabin, at the mountains that no longer felt like enemies. She thought of the auction platform, the gavel, the papers waiting to tear her children away. I choose this, she said again, every day. Caleb reached for her hand, not rushed, not demanding. When their fingers met, it felt right, solid, earned. By summer, word had spread, not about the auction, not about the price, but about the woman who stood strong in the high country, about the mother of 7 who faced down a dangerous man and did not flinch, about the mountain homestead that thrived when others failed. Eleanor Hayes was no longer a burden in anyone's story. She was the heart of her own, and in the quiet valley, surrounded by her children's laughter and a man who saw her worth from the start, Eleanor finally knew what it meant to belong.